Hello and welcome, I'm your CodeMonk, and in this series we're making Snake in Unity. In this video we're going to deal with loading so we can reload the game when we die. Let's begin. Okay, so here's our game. We have the snake move around, we can eat some food. Whenever we do, the body grows, and as you can see, the score increases. And right now, if we have enough of a body, we can actually trigger a game over. So there's the body with a nice size, and now if I wrap around it, and there you go, we get a game over, it says dead, and everything just stops. So right now, in order to reset, I have to stop and restart the scene. So let's deal with loading so we can reload the game scene when we die. So in order to deal with loading, let's make a dedicated class. So in here, a new C# script, and this will be our loader. Now in here, this will be a very simple class. So first of all, let's get rid of mono behavior. And also let's make this a static class. That means we can only have static methods and fields. We cannot instantiate this class, which for a loader class, it's exactly what we want. So now let's make a simple load function. So we do a public static void load. And inside, in order to load, we need to go up here and do using Unity engine.scene management. Inside that namespace, we can now use the scene manager to use the load scene. And now in here, we need the name for the scene that we want to load. Now, instead of using strings in our code, let's make an enum that has the scene name. So in here, let's make a public enum, and this will be our scene. So our current scene name, as you can see in the editor, we named this our game scene, so let's use that. So define our first value for the game scene. And now in the load function, let's receive a scene for the scene to load. And in order to load it, we simply load our scene and put it .toString since this expects a string. Alright, so we now have a very simple function we can call. So now let's go back into the game handler. And in here on start, let's create a simple testing button. So in here, using the CMDebug class, which again is part of the CodeMonk utilities, I can create a simple button on the UI. So this function is very simple. It just takes a position where to spawn the button, some text that will say on the button, and finally an action that will happen when we click on the button. So in here, we want to test our loading. So we're going to do our loader and call the load function, and we're going to load the game scene. So that's it, very simple. We now have a nice button so we can test to make sure our loader is currently working. So let's see. And okay, here's our nice testing button. So if I click on it, yep, there you go, the scene reloaded. So let's put the snake down there. Okay, so now the snake has a body. Let's hit reload and see if everything returns to normal. Hit reload and yep, there you go, the snake went back to 0, and the new food was spawned. Alright, so the scene apparently reloaded completely back to normal. However, as you can see, we have an issue with our score. It did not reset when we reload the scene. So let's look into why that's happening. So here in the game handler, we are storing the score using this private static field. And since it's static, that means that when the game handler instance is destroyed, this static variable continues to hold the same value. So one solution is to have a function to initialize our static variables and call it on awake. So let's go down here to make that function. And in this function, all we're going to do is set the score back to 0. And now let's call this on our awake. Okay, so now let's test again and see if the score gets correctly reset when we reload the scene. Okay, here we are, there's the snake. Now let's eat some food. Now I have a score of 100, and if I hit reload, yep, there you go, the score reset back to 0. And if I hit another one, now it goes up to 100 again, and so on. Alright, so everything is working correctly. Now, one potential issue we have is that the game hangs while loading. In this case, it's loading pretty fast, so you can't really see that problem, but let's try instantiating some more objects just to see that problem in action. So in order to make our game hang on start, let's add a bunch of food on our setup. Okay, so here we have some code in order to test the problem that I'm talking about. So essentially, we are simply instantiating 50,000 game objects whenever we start. This will make sure our loading takes quite a while. So let's test. Okay, there's a snake. Let me eat some food. Okay, the snake is dead. Now I would like to reload the scene. So let's hit reload and see how long this image stays on. And I click reload and yep, there you go. As you can see, it stayed stuck on that image for a while. So while we are loading, we don't want to display a static image which makes it seem like the game has broken, so let's add a nice loading scene. So for that, let's go up here and create a new scene, and this will be called our loading. And in here, let's just create a very simple UI. Okay, so this is it, very simple. We just have an empty scene just saying loading in the corner. That way the player can know that the game is currently loading. So now let's go back into the loader class. And first let's add a new value to our enum for our loading scene. And now on the load function, before we load our target scene, let's load the loading scene. So first we load the loading scene, then once that one is visible, then we load our target scene. Right, that should do it, so let's go back to the game and see if it's working. Also, in order to use the scene management.loading, we need to go up here into the build settings and add our scenes. So in here, let's add the game scene and the loading scene. And okay, here we are, and if I hit the reload scene, you can see that nothing actually changed. It is still hanging on this screen before reloading the same scene. The issue we have right now is that in our code, we are loading the loading scene and then immediately loading the target scene. So we are never leaving any time for the screen to update between these two statements. So what we need is to load the loading scene and then wait for an update for the screen to refresh, and then we can load our target scene. So for that, let's create a script that waits for one update and then run some code. So let's create a new script, a new C# script, and this will be our loader callback. And in here, let's wait for our first update. So we have just a boolean by default set to true, and on the first update we set it back to false. So in here this code will run only once after the very first update. So when this happens, let's tell the loader that the scene has correctly loaded, and we can now run the rest of the code. So for that, let's go into our loader and make another function. So we now have this nice function that we can go back into the loader callback and call it. So do loader dot call the loader callback function. So we now have this function being called on the very first update after we load something. So now all we need is to store an action of what to do when we get this called. Okay, so let's see the code that I've written here. First, I added a field for the loader callback action. An action is just a function that you can save in a field. So when we call the load function, we give it a scene that we want to load, and we set the loader callback action to be an action which will trigger the load scene of that target scene. So essentially, when this action is triggered, it will execute this line of code which will load our target scene. So first we set our field, and then we load our loading scene. When the loading scene has finished loading and it updates our screen, then this script will run, and this script will call our loader callback function. And this loader callback function will check to make sure that our action is not null, and if it isn't, then we simply call our action, which again will load the target scene. So what we should see happening is we load our loading scene. When it finishes loading, we load our target scene. So let's see. And we also need that script to run, so obviously let's create a game object for the loader callback and drag our script onto it. Okay, so now we are ready to test. So here we are with our reload scene button. So there's our snake moving. Now I hit reload scene, and there you go. It loaded a nice black loading screen, and then it loaded our actual scene. So I click reload again. First it goes into loading, then finishes loading, and it shows this screen. So now we no longer have a static image, which makes it seem like the game is broken. And again, the reset is still working, so I can still go all the way up here, eat some food, eat some more. So now my body is large enough, so now let's trigger our snake death. There you go, the snake has died. And now in order to play again, let's click the reload scene button, and there you go, we went into loading, and now back, and we're back into score 0 with a size of 0. So there you have it, we created the loader class to help us load various scenes and took care of bugs related to static fields. In the next video, we're going to create a game over window. As always, you can download the project files and utilities from unitycodemonkey.com. If you have any questions, post them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. Subscribe for more videos and I'll see you next time.